Economic Sciences. Today, Sir would be talking to us about the topic Gambling for Redemption or Ripoff and the impact of Superpriority, which was also co-authored by Dr. Zinyu Hu. And in this session, we have with us Professor Dr. Ranita Nagar ma'am, who will be moderating the session. She is the head of Center for Law and Economics, GNLU, and is currently a professor of economics. Pam has started the Center for Law and Economics and has also introduced the course of Law and Economics in the university under the visionary Professor Dr. Bimal Patel Sir, now Vice Chancellor of Rashtriya Raksha University and also a former director of GNLE. She is also the founding member of Indian Association of Law and Economics and has teaching and research experience spanning more than 18 years. It's my honor to hand over the session to Professor Dr. Ranita Nagar ma'am for the moderation.
Thank you, Krishna. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. The Gujarat National Law University Center of Law and Economics today has a distinct honor and an absolute pride to have a session that is being delivered by Professor Dr. Philip Dybvig, the Sturgis Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Marshall 2022. His paper, today's paper, would be with regard to the issue of super priority rights, which he has co-authored with Dr. Zinyu Hu. I will take just a minute because the time for this session is extremely valuable, too valuable for me to really, take away any of this. But I'll just say two words about the work on which Professor Dybvig has the claim of the Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences. The paper written by Professor Dybvig and Professor Douglas, the 1983 paper published in 1983 on bank runs, deposit insurance and liquidity in the Journal of Political Economy. And the second paper in 1993, so it spanned, I'm sure there must have been a lot of work in between, but from it spans a period of 10 years between these two papers. And that is by Professor Dybvig on remarks on banking and deposit insurance in the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis Review. The work that Professor Dybvig and Professor Douglas, their work is acclaimed as the Dybvig diamond model, and they explain the very contradictory nature of the short-run and long-run liquidity issues that arise as far as banking, the banking sector is concerned. To reconcile that is the difficulty. Sir also goes in the model. They also Sir also goes in to illustrate the problem of the multiple Nash equilibrium that come to exist, based on which it becomes important to understand that it is it's so essential to bail out the banks, because even if there is some form of a undercurrent of crisis, failure of banks will just make it all the more irretrievable. And this work and this I think stems from the origins of the Great Depression, where this whole insight was not clearly understood. But in the 2008 crisis, this exactly was the remedy that was resorted to, and maybe the worst outcomes were averted. So this was the pioneering contribution of Professor Dybvig, along with his colleague, Professor Douglas Diamond. It's everywhere, it's in books, it's on YouTube. This discussion is very well projected. I just kind of gave a bit of an introduction, for the benefit of the audience that we have here. On that note, I'll just completely, leave the floor open for Professor Dybvig the Nobel laureate of the Holding Nobel laureate 2022, and ask him to present his paper on the issues of super priority. And yes, I'll just conclude there. Professor Dybvig, the floor is yours. And GNLU, our university, is so extremely, extremely, extremely honored by your consent. It means a huge amount, it means a lot to us. And Dr. Hu, we equally welcome you. The floor is yours, Professor.
Well, thank you very much. That was a nice introduction. I'd like to thank the people at Silicon Valley Bank for giving additional advertising for our work this week. The SVB in California that failed obviously has also been promoting our research. Just to comment on that, in our model, if you have deposit insurance, then that takes away the incentive for people to run in the bank. But that's not true if you have partial deposit insurance with a cap, because the uninsured deposits still can have an incentive to run. And I think that's something that they can do better in the policy in the future. But anyway, I think it's a pleasure to be here in Gujarat. I've never been to Gujarat before, and I hope next time we'll be in person, but virtually is better than none at all. I miss the food that I would get if I were there in person, but that's the way it goes.
Professor, and music.
Oh yes, the music.
And music, yeah.
The sitar music, is that most popular? Or I guess there's a lot of different Indian music. So so how long do I have? It's what about it's at what 7:10 your time? Do I have until 8 o'clock your time? Is that
Absolutely.
is that
Absolutely.
is that the schedule? I want to make sure I get the schedule right. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk today about a topic in law and economics. I've had interest in law and economics for a long time, although I haven't done so much research on it. It's really interesting for me to see the interaction between the law and the economics, and it's in my mind it's often hard to separate the two, because the way the law operates is through the incentives, the economic incentives it creates, at least in many cases. Obviously, there are big parts of the law that have nothing to do with economics, but there are a lot of things in finance, and bankruptcy law is one fascinating area. I started getting interested in this research because Bill Gavin at the St. Louis Fed called my attention to a paper by a law professor at Stanford Rowe that talked about these super priority claims. Probably the regulators would call them QFCs, qualified financial contracts. And they have what he referred to as super priority. Super priority is perhaps a bit of a misnomer. What it actually, so priority is who gets served first in bankruptcy, who should be paid first, and that's obviously more obvious in a liquidation, but obviously the rights also matter if you're in a Chapter 11 in the U.S., where with the reorganization, your rights that you would have under Chapter 8 still matter, say in a cram down. But let's think about Chapter 8. So it's a strict liquidation. So that's what we're thinking about. In principle, you can look at the claims and you see what their priority is. So you can rank them from who gets paid first, who gets paid second, and so forth. Part of bankruptcy is that that's not always clear. And for example, if my bond contract says it's senior to your bond contract, and your bond contract says it's senior to mine, and there's not enough money to pay us both, then something has to be done to resolve that conflict. That's part of what bankruptcy law is about. But But anyway, this notion of priority in bankruptcy is not applicable now to many financial contracts. Originally futures and repos, repurchase agreements, but now many derivatives are not subject to bankruptcy law. They're exempt from bankruptcy law in the sense that they aren't covered by the automatic stay that says you can't collect debts once you're in bankruptcy, and they're also not subject to the clawback. If you have you pay somebody a claim in the months before a bankruptcy and the firm is out of money, the bankruptcy court can claw back that payment and put it into the estate for the bankruptcy, and it's part of what you paid. By the way, I should mention apology, which you probably guessed by now, which is I don't really know Indian law. I don't know Indian law at all. So when I talk about the legal institutions, these are going to be the ones in the United States, and hopefully the ideas will still be useful in other places as well. Okay, anyway, that got started according to Roe, having these super priority claims that they don't just have priority in bankruptcy at the top. They don't even have to, they have priority in effect greater than all the claims in bankruptcy because they don't have to go into bankruptcy. They can be settled without that. So that's why they're called super priority claims. Roe referred to this as a financial crisis accelerator and claimed that it had a big role in the 2008 crisis and the failure of Lehman and problems at AIG. So gambling. So the other theme of this is gambling. So gambling by the firm, by shareholders, has been a theme for a long time in the finance literature. One of the very first papers I learned about was a working paper version of a paper by Stuart Myers, which talks about asset substitution. And asset substitution is a choice by the firm, the owners of the firm, to take on more risk than is optimal and choose possibly a suboptimal production technology. And when you do that, it can be beneficial to the owners because the owners get the upside and the bondholders bear the downside. And so that's this idea of gambling by management and using that as a device for ripping off the shareholders. Now, as described by Myers, it's kind of a blunt instrument. It's not very precise because if you only have a limited set of choices of technologies, and if you add noise in part of the distribution, you're probably adding noise to the whole distribution. And what is different today is because of
Professor, can the slides be changed?
Yeah, I'm
Sorry.
so I haven't actually quite gotten to the main results, but I'll be there in a second.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So I am talking quite a long time. So but anyway, in the second theme, so gambling using just changing your production technology to one that's noisier is not very precise. But these days, with derivative securities, for example, a digital option that either pays off zero or it pays off a fixed amount, we can choose very precisely to the distribution of the payoffs of the gamble. And what that means is that the whole flavor of gambling is somewhat different. And so we were motivated originally by this thing in the law. And we're going to talk about gambling by firms more generally with assumptions that reflect what we think are the characteristics of gambling with derivatives. Okay, so that's the background. And these are the main results that we have in our paper. There's a kind of gambling which we call gambling for redemption, which is actually beneficial. So a good example of this is that in the early days of Federal Express, the founder, Fred Smith, found himself in a cash flow bind. They had $5,000 of cash. They had a $25,000 fuel bill due, and they were under threat of going bankrupt. And the founder, Fred Smith, took a trip to Las Vegas with the local cash. Apparently, their accounting controls were not so strict, and took the cash to Las Vegas and gambled up to $32,000, and that gave the firm enough money to pay the cash flows and continue for another week. And of course, it grew into a very big firm. So this looks like it might be something that is like what Myers was talking about, that you're ripping off the bondholders, but actually the bondholders are probably better off. So the owners are certainly better off because instead of getting zero in bankruptcy, they get the value of the continuation value of the firm. And the bondholders are actually also probably better off. So maybe they have a 1/3 probability of getting paid. Well, let's make it maybe they have a 1/5 probability of being paid $25,000 instead of a probability of 1 of paying $5,000. But chances are in bankruptcy, they wouldn't have been paid the full $5,000. So probably they're better off. The difference between this and the asset substitution is because of the precision of the gambling. You stay in a part of the distribution where the bondholders don't care about the risk. And I'll get to that, and that'll show up in the analysis in a few minutes. But anyway, so this is a good one. It's fair gambling. It's at a very small scale. In asset substitution for Myers, it wasn't fair gambling because you're choosing an inferior production technique in order to be able to add noise. In this case, with derivatives, the cost, it's going to be close to a fair gamble. And the cost of, so it's going to be very close to fair gambling because the costs are small. So the second thing that we find, and it's going to depend on the parameter values, is gambling for ripoff. And gambling for ripoff is you're taking these fair gambles, but at a very large scale. And the point is that the owners will get the upside, the bondholders will bear the cost on the downside, and this is like asset substitution, but it's super powered. It's on steroids because you have the power of derivative securities to do exactly what you want to do. It's like you can rip off the bondholders more effectively. Socially, this is not beneficial because the continuation value of the firm is lost, but for the equity holders, it's valuable because they don't have to pay off the debt most of the time, and they prefer that's more valuable to them than the continuation value would be. So I want to continue the next bullet point here. is talking about this. So in the model, it comes out of the model, and this is something we didn't kind of guess in advance, that, well, first of all, we didn't guess the two types of gambling. But the other thing that we didn't guess in advance when we were writing down the model is that the owners like to gamble at big time when they don't benefit from the firm continuing. So in the simplest example, that would mean that if the continuation value is less than the face value of the debt they have to pay right now, then they're going to be better off not paying that. And the gambling allows them to collect the value of the assets, but still not pay off the debt most of the time. And the other thing that's going to matter, and this relates to the super priority, is if you can use the existing assets to gamble, and the mechanism for that is through the super priority claims, then you can do a bigger gamble. And if you can do a bigger gamble, that's going to make it more attractive to gamble for ripoff and gamble at very large scale. So I talked some already about super priority, and we'll go and I think most of what I want to say about that is I've already said, but I'll talk a little more about that. And then in the way it goes into the model, super priority typically in the examples that we've gone through is costly for the firm. So what if you change the law today to allow the gambling, that is going to probably benefit a firm that's in distress today. And it allows that firm to gamble out of their troubles. But if you have a firm that's not in trouble now and you have a super priority law that was anticipated, so people know that it's there, then it actually reduces firm value because the bondholders are going to be less willing to lend you money. And so not being able to borrow money means that your value of your firm is going to be less. So if it's a surprise, you can rip off the bondholders what they have in terms of their position, their bond ownership is just given. It's already there. If they have if you have bondholders who are deciding now whether to enter and they understand that there's going to be this super priority claims, then they're going to be then they're going to be reluctant to lend to you, and that's going to make the firm worse off. Okay, so let me. Okay, so I mentioned a little bit about the bankruptcy law, how it works. As I mentioned, if you listen to bankruptcy lawyers, I've been to bankruptcy conferences, and you find out that bankruptcy is a magical thing, and it's not possible to describe all the benefits. But some of the benefits that I've been able to figure out from talking with the bankruptcy scholars and talking with practitioners, is that it helps for a fair resolution. In the case of Chapter 11, which is, we're not going to go there. This is for our model, we're just going to have liquidation. In case of Chapter 11, it's supposed to try to find a way out to give a efficient deployment of assets in spite of the firm being in trouble now. If we look at strict liquidation, we still have that it's there to resolve conflicting claims. I mentioned that. And the other thing is it has kind of an orderly and fair resolution of the bankruptcy claims. So let's say that I have a firm that's on the verge of bankruptcy. I owe money to the bank, and I also owe money to my brother-in-law. But I hate my brother-in-law, so I don't pay him, but I pay the bank. And I do that 1 week before I declare bankruptcy. And I don't have any money left. The firm doesn't have any money left to pay my brother-in-law. Well, that's going to be called a preferential distribution. Preferential just means that it's a payment just before bankruptcy. How long before depends on the type of transaction, and I don't have enough money to satisfy all the claims. So that's a preferential claim that I gave to the bank. According to the bankruptcy code, the bankruptcy judge can claw back that claim and get the money back from the bank and then distribute it fairly according to the priority. So that's what the clawback is about. And that's supposed to, one of the things that that's supposed to do is to make sure that there's a fair distribution of the proceeds of the bankruptcy. Another thing that it's for is to keep you there from being kind of a feeding frenzy, a run. It's like a bank run, a run on the assets where people come in and grab assets in satisfaction of different claims. And so we could have a paper, by the way, on the super priority claims that talk about how that reintroduces the probability of one of these feeding frenzies and what does that imply. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at we're going to look at one other kind of implication here. So anyway, what this means is that if a firm is on the verge of bankruptcy, there's no point in going in and seizing assets or demanding payment if you're sure they're going into bankruptcy, because it'll probably be clawed back anyway. However, with this super priority rule, and it started with futures and repos, swaps, and then finally in 2005, pretty much all derivatives. They're exempt from the automatic stay and the clawback. They also have special netting rights. I'm not going to talk about that. This is the set off and liquidation rights. But the effect of this is that you can use this to generate claims that are in effect senior to all the claims in the firm. So you have the most senior debt in the firm, or you have a claim to wages, which is even more senior. Somebody can come in with one of these derivatives claims and take the money out of the firm even while it's in bankruptcy or just before going into bankruptcy. There's no callback, there's no automatic stay. The stay says you can't collect, you can't have collection activities against the firm while they're in bankruptcy. This Roe 2011 is a paper I mentioned before, the one that Bill Gavin had shown to us. And that's according to him, that had this type of super priority claims had a role in Lehman Brothers, AIG, and Bear Stearns. Now, the arguments that he put forth for why this was a problem were a little different, and he was talking about monitoring and incentive arguments. They all kind of come from the same area. They also have kind of a law and economics flavor, but the mechanism for the problems of super priority in our analysis are just a little different. Okay, so let me move now to the model. So Shinyu and I have been working really hard. Shinyu's been working harder than I have for the last few weeks to get a revision done, and so If this is comprehensible, I think Shinu gets a lot of credit because of all the work in the last couple of weeks. We also have been redoing all the numerical work. We had some changes in the model a while back, and now we also have new numerical work for that. And I hope we've been successful in clarifying the ideas that are going on. Okay, so this is kind of an economic balance sheet. This is not an accounting balance sheet would have book values. The idea of an economic balance sheet is you have the economic values of the different pieces. And some of these are also kind of the accounting values. For example, cash will be the same. Continuation value is not on a normal accounting statement. There'd be something like that under the equity over here, but it's continuation value likely isn't even part of the book value. Okay, so anyway, what do we have here? So we have cash. This will be the cash flow that we just got this period from operations. These are the net proceeds from gambling. Could be positive or negative. And this is the money that we can raise from new bonds. Okay, so we see here, this is at a time when you've completed whatever gambling you've done, you've received the cash flows, and you've just gone to the market and you've issued new debt, and you paid B, so you have now a liability, which is in the amount of the bond. So this is what we would put in accounting. So we have assets, we have cash, continuation value. As I say, that probably wouldn't be in the book. You probably would have some capital, something, but that would be part of this continuation value. The thing that's going to be important for us is do you have the cash that you need to continue? So this is the cash that you have. You have this as the face value of debt that's maturing now that you have to pay. And the firm can continue, and it does continue in this picture because the cash you have is enough to cover the payment you need to make to the debt holders. That'll be the criterion. And in the value of the equity, you're going to end up with a continuation value as well as the value of the cash less the value of the debt up here, which is a liability. Now, if this isn't true, so this is the opposite case from the previous slide. So the firm is going to fail because your cash is not enough to cover the payment. In this case, you cannot raise the new debt, so there's no B here. There's no continuation value because the firm is being liquidated, but there is some liquidation value of the assets. And that liquidation value of the assets plus the cash is what's going to be distributed in the bankruptcy. Now, this is the cute name my advisor used for bankruptcy costs. So he called that the claim of the lawyers and the accountants. So the bankruptcy lawyers and the accountants whose services are going to be needed to resolve the firm, go over the books, check out the legal issues, etc., do the court filings and everything with the bankruptcy court. All of those are going to be cost, and we just assume that's a fixed proportion C of the bankruptcy estate. And for the parameter values, I I assumed in drawing this picture, there is something left over in the firm, and that's going to go to the existing bondholders, but they have to pay subject to the costs that they pay. Okay, so that's the basic setup. So the firm fails, there are bankruptcy costs, and you lose the continuation value. And if the firm continues, there are no bankruptcy costs, and you do have a continuation value. So those are the economic costs that we're going to assume for bankruptcy. Okay, so for the firm's owners, they get to choose if they like to gamble. So we have cases that we look at where you cannot gamble. In that case, this is just equal to 0. But we're going to assume gambling is fair, and that's a good approximation for gambling with derivatives, because you can buy derivatives with very small transactions cost. The house take is quite small if you buy liquid derivatives, some futures, something. When this expectation, everything I'm going to do in the paper is going to assume risk neutrality, but it's not essential. So we know from the martingale pricing results originally of Cox and Ross, risk neutral pricing. If we adjust these expectations to be some risk adjusted probabilities, we can use expectations in general for valuation. Now, if the gambling, when the gambling is feasible, how much can we gamble? We're going to take an upper bound, as it says down here. This is very big. This is only to prevent a closure problem. So if it's the case that that no matter how much you're going to gamble up to, you'd like to gamble a little more, then there's not going to be an actual solution. But if you look at the value and the limit as you gamble to bigger and bigger values, that solution, the value, everything converges in a nice way. And so we look at the payoffs for the agents and everything. So we want to have this just for a technical reason. You could think of this as, well, you can't gamble more than the whole wealth of the whole economy or something. There is going to be a limit to how much you gamble. As a practical matter, if it's not in the model, if you take a big enough gamble in the securities market, it'll start affecting prices. So, and that's gonna be a limiting factor. But this has the same economic function, but it's simpler for the analysis. And that's whenever you're doing economic theory, you have a limited number of degrees of freedom of what you can actually solve. And so you're going to put the complexity of the model in the parts that are important for your message, not in some other part. This part is not important for my message, so we want Shinyu and I want to have just a simple way of handling that. Now, in terms of how much you can lose, and well, you could think of having a gamble where you promise a billion gazillion dollars. That's a made up big number, but it's not credible. People know you're not going to really be able to pay that much. It's an empty promise. So what you can actually pay is what they know that they can collect from you. So if you have no super priority, then what they can collect is the cash flow. So you can have a payoff of minus the cash flow you just collected from your operations. If you have super priority, then there's also some fraction of the liquidation value you can collect. Implicit behind here is that you're not allowed to just liquidate assets and give them out. And that's probably because of bond covenants. In the if you didn't have super priority and you have a bond that says you're not allowed to liquidate assets, and if you do, you're in default, then, and they're usually cross default terms on bonds, what's going to happen is that as soon as you liquidate materially large amounts of assets, you'll be in default on that bond, and because of default cross default clauses, you'll be in default in all the other bonds, and you'll be forced into bankruptcy. So that kind of enforcement mechanism using the using bond covenants relies on what happens in bankruptcy. But the super priority claims, if you have a fraction gamma that are not, say, already pledged as collateral that are available to liquidate before bankruptcy, then the super priority claims say that you can gamble away those two because you can credibly pay those claims. And we're going to, this is our single period version of the model. We're going to take everything except for the gambling is going to be exogenous, which is actually a better assumption, it sounds like, but I'm not going to tell you why. But that's what the gambling is. So when we're talking about super priority, we're basically talking about varying this parameter gamma. And for examples in the single period model, we're going to take gamma equal to 1, which is that you can gamble away the entire liquidation value because you can use the entire value to pay super priority claims. It could be that half of these claims that you could liquidate in bankruptcy cannot be liquidated before bankruptcy because they're associated with perfected collateral for a loan. Perfected collateral does not operate through bankruptcy law. It operates through a separate part of the code. And if the firm sells some perfected collateral, then that sale can be reversed, but also the person who buys it is in trouble. And so that's from a different part of the legal code. So anyway, to allow this general thing, our model allows gamma to be between 0 and 1. Typically, we'll take it to be 0, no super priority, 1, super priority. Okay, so this is a picture I like the best. And this is where the intuition is. So this is a case without any super priority, gamma 0, and we have this payoff. So if there's no gambling available, then when the available cash is less than what you need to pay off the existing debt, then you're going to have to fail, and the equity holders will get 0. Above that level, there's a continuation value in play. You have to raise this new debt to pay off the existing debt, but that's going to be the part that's left for the equity holders. So you get the continuation value. This is a single period model, but it has a flavor of a multi-period model because of this continuation value that's in there. So it allows us to do very simple analysis, have a simple picture, but still have some of the flavor of a more dynamic setting. Now, if you're sitting here with this much cash, what you can do is instead of just having that, if you're allowed to gamble, you can get a fair gamble that goes up to here. And that fair gamble will give you this payoff because you get this amount. Let's say that's let's say that's pi 1 is 60% of f minus b, then you'll get this payoff c minus b 60% of the time, this payoff 0 40% of the time, and you'll be up here. This will be your expected payoff for the equity. Now, for the bondholder, they're going to get what's left in the firm, but which is liquidation. Here's just the liquidation value. Over here, it's also, for the rest of the curve, it's also some cash. But this is less than this red line because of bankruptcy costs. So the bondholders are going to get expected value this, half the 60% of the time over here, 40% over the time over there. But they're going to be better off too. Now for people who've been trained in finance, because of Meyer's work that I talked about before, people think taking on noise is bad for bondholders because they have a concave payoff. But the point is the concavity is only at this point. This is the one without cost. The concavity is only in this point. So long as you stay on one side of this point, it's linear and you're risk neutral. So the risk doesn't hurt the bondholders. Avoiding the bankruptcy cost helps them. So interestingly, this is a case where the gambling helps the owners and the bondholders. Okay, this is what we call gambling for redemption. It's a good thing. It's like what happened with Fred Smith and in the early days of Federal Express. Okay, now here's the uglier case. This is the case of gambling for ripoff. In this case, other things equal, the owners don't want the firm to continue because the continuation value is less than the debt they're going to have to pay to make it continue. And what you can do is you can use gambling to concentrate all the firm's value into a very small set of states. So all the other states, you're going to go bankrupt. You get 0, but you get a huge value in that state. Okay, so you could think about gambling. You could just gamble for redemption. That would be this. That would give you this curve. But if you gamble up to this bigger value, you get this one. If you gamble up to this bigger value, you get this. If you gamble up to some much bigger value, you get this curve. And in the limit, if G bar, this limit on how big a gamble you can place, goes off to infinity, in the limit, you can capture the whole value of the firm. And similarly, a similar thing is happening to the bondholders. So if you just gambled for redemption, bondholders would be better off. That'd be the same as the other picture. But as the gambles get bigger and bigger, the owners are more and more effective at closing out the bondholders. And the limit where that's a very big gamble, all they get is the what they collect of the liquidation value in bankruptcy. So that part you can't stop, but in the case of Superpriority, actually you can appropriate that as well. So if it's a case that the continuation value is low and the debt that's due now is high, then you want to gamble at for ripoff, which is gambling at a very large scale. So you concentrate all the value in a small set of states and you get paid off then. And all the rest of the states, at least the bondholders, don't get anything. And you're happy to give up the continuation value because to get it, you'd have to pay something bigger, the pay off the debt holders. Okay, So what happens when you have super priority? When you have super priority, then the liquidation value also becomes available for gambling. So if this is an example where you have gambling for redemption, if you have no super priority, so you would just gamble up to here. But if you have super priority, then you want to do is just as big a gamble as you can get. You always gamble down to here. Now, notice you can gamble not only your cash but also the liquidation value. And when you gamble that away, and then you want to make this a very big number. When you do this, you get something close to here. And that's also going to rip off the bondholders. Because they get something way over here with a very small probability. It's just bounded. It's just so it's just proportional to the probability, which is very small. And then the rest of the time they get 0. They're sitting over here. In this case, they don't get the liquidation value because that's been sucked out of the firm before the firm goes into bankruptcy. Okay, so if you're interested, this is a formal statement of the firm's problem in the single period setting. And this is just the formal result that talks about how basically what I talked about in the figure. It says that if you have that the face value of the debt is not too big, the continuation value is big enough, and super priority is not too high, some combination of those three described here, then you're going to gamble for redemption. And what that means is if you're in the money, actually over a range you're indifferent about gambling, but so are the bondholders. That's the second case. I would think of, intuitively, I think of this case as you just don't gamble. There's no point in gambling here. There's no need to gamble. And then if you don't have enough to pay the debt holders right now, you'll gamble exactly the gamble that I showed in the other picture. You'll gamble just enough. If you win the gamble, you get just enough to satisfy your current claims, and if you lose, you get nothing. And that way, you get to continue the firm more often. You're better off. And then this is the similar result for gambling for ripoff, and this shows the optimal strategy. Basically, if you have a cap G bar, you'll undertake a gamble that goes up to the cap or down to 0. Interesting thing I didn't mention already, but you want to gamble even if you're in the money. Oh, where is this picture? This one. So in this example, even if you start here, you want to gamble up to there. So you're in the money. You don't have to fail here, but you're saying, I don't have to fail, but I want to fail. If I don't fail, I'm losing money. I'm paying out F, which is big, and I'm getting C, which is small. And so even if you're in this continuation region, you want to gamble for ripoff. I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, so in that single period model, everything is exogenous. How much debt there is, what is the continuation value, all these things that really should be endogenous. And so we also have a multi-period model that we solve, and we make lots of things endogenous. How much you can borrow, what are the terms on which you can borrow, what's the continuation value of the for the equity holders, how much new borrowing there is. There's also investment. You can invest to increase your capital. These things are features of the model, symmetric information, subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. We look for homogeneous solution. It's a homogeneous problem. But anyway, the idea is to get this more general. And so in the single period model, it's like what I mentioned. If you have legislation coming in that's a complete surprise, this increases your value because that gambling is a good opportunity. But if people knew the gambling was available, they might not lend you as much money because they know they wouldn't get paid off. And that's exactly the kind of question that this can answer that the single period problem can't. And here's some more details of the model. And the short answer is that if you have significant super priority, here's some more stuff. I had the link to the slides in the first slide. If you didn't see that and you want it now, you can email me or email Shinya. We can send you the link. But here is the value function. This is the continuation value as a function per unit of capital as a function of the cash surplus per capital. And this is the super priority case where gamma equals 1. You can gamble away all the liquidation value, and that has the lowest value. In this region, it's kind of sad because the bondholders know that you could gamble away their proceeds later. The bondholders aren't willing to lend it to you, even though you're at a point when there's some residual value if you have a liquidation. And then you may gamble away from that, but that's this part here is just you're getting what's left over after you've paid off the existing bondholders. And even though there's something left over there, new bondholders don't want to issue debt at any price that will allow you to pay off the existing debt. This is the case when gamma equals a half. So this is like if half of the assets are perfected collateral and half are not. This is the case where you're allowed to gamble, but only your existing cash flows. And this is the case where there's no gambling. So for this set of parameter values, more gambling is bad. That is a little special to these parameter values. We're still exploring all the different parameter values. What we find in all the examples that we've gone through so far is that having super priority at a large level restricts your ability to borrow and makes your value low. If you think about the choice of gambling before that, this picture doesn't tell the whole thing because it doesn't tell you how much of this surplus comes from face value, how much comes from cash flow. But for different ones, then you'll have different things, and these are the different kinds of gambles that you'll do. So here, if you can gamble down to there, this is what you do, and so forth. You do have a gamble for ripoff here. You have gambling for redemption here, but you also have a lot of intermediate cases. I still like the intuition of gambling for ripoff versus gambling for redemption, but in the multi-period model, it's richer than that, and more things can happen. So I'm just about out of time. Again, we're looking at gambling for firms. We find that there's gambling for redemption, like in FedEx case, which is gambling just enough to pay off your claims, and that's good for bondholders and for the owners. There's gambling for ripoff, which is gambling at large scale. It's good for the owners, but it's bad for the bondholders, and it's bad for the economy because you incur the bankruptcy costs, the loss of continuation value, and the administrative costs of bankruptcy more often. So this is related to the Superpriority law, the exemption from bankruptcy law, the QFCs, because it makes gambling at large scale easier and pushes us towards ripoff and tends to reduce value once it's anticipated. And so I'd like to thank Xinyu for working with me on this, helping me to figure this all out, and I'd like to thank the audience for being patient and having a listen.
And GNLU Center for Law and Economics thanks you. I think we can open to questions, and just before that, I would like to, Mr. Dybvig, just introduce some leading professors of law and economics who are with us. Professor Stephanus from University of Pretoria, South Africa. Professor Ram Singh, leading expert of law and economics in India. We have Professor Carlos Del Vasto also, who has joined us. Professor Gabriel Messina is also with us. We just took the opportunity, and of course, most importantly, the young convener of the GNLU Center for Law and Economics, Dr. Hitesh Thakkar. And of course, amazing scholars and faculties from across India who are with us in the audience. Just that we don't have time to, take each one's name and introduce them to you, but these are a few names that I kind of, just had to place in front of you. With that, Krishna, we can open for sessions, for questions. Yes.
So are there any questions? Are there any questions?
I'm having trouble hearing. I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat the question for me? I think we have a sound problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Professor. We can hear you. You're not audible. The question.
Yeah, something wrong with your microphone, I guess.
Maybe.
Can somebody relay the question? Oh, that's closer. Oh no, it came and it went.
You can put it in the chat, maybe. Oh, you don't have a chat option there because you're offline.
Maybe they could send you an email.
Maybe, yes. Professor Ram Singh. Professor Ram Singh.
Can you try this one? Is it now audible?
Yes, you're audible. I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, you sound like you're in a fishbowl, though. We'll see how this works.
I will first check if you can hear me. Or can make sense of my voice and words. Is it net achievable or it's still too much of a take on?
Not clear. The question is not clear. Dr.
The,
Thakkar,
yeah, the audio still has a problem.
Dr. Thakkar, can you please handle it? Maybe, if you can kind of give the online access, maybe that will help.
Yeah. इसको बंद करो.
Okay, so I don't know where the chat is, but if you can,
Professor, we are looking into it. Just if you would give us 2 minutes, we'll try and
I think I saw something coming on chat. I don't know how to see it though.
So Dr. Thakkar is in the chat telling you that yeah.
Now there's a lot of feedback.
Yeah, that's
Now we're all in a fishbowl. Oh,
okay. So till the time we have the question coming in, Professor, can I ask you something on your, the work on the Dybvig diamond model? Can I ask you something on that?
yeah. It's actually, I like Dybvig diamond, but it's actually diamond Dybvig. Diamond comes before Dybvig in the alphabet.
Okay, diamond Dybvig model. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So the proposition of deposit insurance and the proposition of suspension of convertibility, would that not in a sense place the burden of the cause of the crisis? Is it not externalizing the cause of the crisis?
Okay, well, so
It's minimizing the aggregate burden of the crisis, but is it not being done in a disproportionate manner in the form of externalizing
yeah,
it?
so we think of that as a bad outcome, and I think there are two problems with it. One is that there are people who really do need their money out and they can't get it, and that places a big burden on those depositors.
Yes.
And then the other problem is that there are that if you anticipate that they might do this, that they might shut down the bank and stop honoring the deposits, you may take your money out and run on the bank in anticipation of that. So that can actually trigger a run. I mean, there are cases in which I know I can remember there was one in the news in China which caused a bit of a scandal because the bank was not paying off on their deposits. People go to the bank and they just say, no, you can't have it. And because the bank was in trouble. And then the group of people went to the city and tried to protest, and they changed their health code to red. and the local authorities got into trouble for that. But we don't think of that as a good outcome. There is one good thing about the bank holiday and the Great Depression that I learned from Ben Bernanke's talk in Stockholm, which you can find online, by the way, which is that they use this as a device for a reset. So they They said, we're going to close down the banks. We're going to check them and make sure everything's okay. And we'll reopen in 2 weeks and everything will be good. Now, how did they actually check for the soundness of all the banks in the country in 2 weeks? Obviously, they didn't. But it was enough to get them, to kick them into a better equilibrium. It was kind of a reset. But that's the only good thing I've ever heard about bank holiday or suspension of convertibility.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, there's some questions. Maybe I'll kind of, ask because I'm online and I'm more clear. This question comes
Okay.
from Dr. Thakkar. The question is, uh,
Oh, I found my chat. I've never used WebEx before. I didn't know where my chats were.
so it says, it seems like the gambling technology you focused on did not have much bearing of C, continuation value.
So in the single period problem, we just take C as just a constant, it's given. In the multi-period model, it determines C, but it's C is a continuation value you get from the whole future. So the kind of thing that's happening, and it's a little complex because everything is endogenous. But the way that the kind of reason why it has an impact on C is that tomorrow you're going to gamble for ripoff in a lot of situations, and as a result, but well, let's say 2 days from now you're going to gamble for ripoff in a lot of situations, and that means that at one period from now the bondholders are not going to be willing to lend you very much money, and so you're going to go bankrupt a lot, and that means your continuation value today is small. But it's all determined in equilibrium. The approach we use is a dynamic programming approach, and that's looking at a dynamic problem by looking at the choice at one point in time and using the continuation value to proxy for all these choices in the future. That continuation value will reflect all of what's going on in economics in the future. But that's why C depends on the gambling. Okay, let me see. Another question. Did the gambling model explain part of SVB? So that's a really interesting question. I mean, the striking thing about SVB is that recently they haven't been using derivatives. They should have been using derivatives to hedge the interest rate risk. But they said we're hedging book value and assuming certain things in hedge accounting means the book value doesn't depend on interest rates, but the actual value of the assets did. But the fact that they weren't hedging the interest rate risk. They have these deposits, which are short-term deposits, and they have the bonds that are long-term bonds. Means that their assets are subject to interest rate risk that's not offset with their liabilities. And that is a gambling that they may have thought made them worth more. If interest rates go down, they make a lot of money, they can keep it. If interest rates go up, they lose a lot of money, but who cares? That'll be paid by the depositors in the deposit insurance fund. So whether this is what they were thinking, I don't know, but it is possible that that was part of their thought. That's why, and in general, banks do like to take a lot of risk if you don't regulate them competently. So is it possible to restrict choices of gambling to the right ones. So if you're talking about general firms, usually we give them a lot of freedom. With regulated firms, in principle, we can do more, although SVB is a good example where the regulators didn't seem to be on top of it. The one policy lever that we have in our analysis is whether or not you allow these super priority claims. So if you allow exemption from bankruptcy for the QFCs, that's going to make the incentive problems less aligned. There are other approaches. For example, you could have executive. One thing that is interesting to me is that in a corporation, part of corporateness is that there's separation of ownership and control. And like most models in corporate finance, our model does not have that separation. The owners are making the decisions. But you could design some managerial compensation that would maximize the value of the whole firm, not just the value for the equity holders. And actually, there's been a debate over time on what should the incentive contract, what should the objective function for the management be. And I think it's viewed that maximizing on behalf of the owners is pragmatic and practical. Some people would like to include other financial stakeholders, other stakeholders such as the workers, the community, the environment, all sorts of different things. But you know, it's possible that you could get around this some by changing the incentive contract. I have a paper with Jamie Zender a long time ago that talks about this. Okay, so quantitative easing, bank instability, too big to fail. There's a lot of stuff here. So the macro stuff, I don't know. I think that this time is somewhat different from last time, in that this is being pumped up by the inflation, and then the inflation was probably from responding to the COVID recession as if it were insufficient demand, which is the usual thing. But I don't know. I would really like to have. Well, it says unlimited deposit insurance. Well, I mentioned that at the beginning. I think so right now what we have, at least in a lot of cases, is that the banks pay premium for deposit insurance on small deposits, but not on the part over $250,000. But in a lot of cases, those get insured anyway. It just seems fairer and more practical and more useful to just insure the whole thing from the outset, because then you end up paying premium that you should be paying, and also right now we're getting the cost of insuring the big deposits without the benefits. You know, if you had them all insured, you wouldn't have the run. We can imagine SVB would not have been a big deal if there hadn't been a run. The run is what interrupted the service and made it a big national, international event. It disrupted people who needed to get their money out for some other purposes. There were spillover effects with the stable coin. Don't get me started on crypto. Crypto's a mess. But if they had done the same incompetent monitoring of interest rate risk, then but they had full deposit insurance in place, then nobody would have a reason to run, and the regulators would have closed down the bank at basically the same time as a function of the same news that the depositors ran on. So there's this old story that's has kind of a gut instinct to economists that says that you should have some uninsured deposits because they'll monitor and they'll give some incentives to the bank. But that doesn't bear looking into in the case of banking, because if you have uninsured deposits, the way that they use their monitoring is they run on the bank, and that causes problems. It's not beneficial monitoring. It's not good. So what you really, what I think, I'm a strong proponent of having just full deposit insurance, and you have premiums based on that full deposit insurance, and then you wouldn't have to, to do what we're doing here.
Next one. See better this one.
Okay, so how about okay, so should I ask, are there more questions in the chat? Should I keep going, or are we up?
Hello.
Hello?
Sir, can you hear me?
Maybe. It's you're in a fishbowl
Krishna,
still.
one last question. So we'll take one last question. Is that all right, Krishna? Okay. So this is from Professor Carlos Del Vasto, and the question is how we might extend the insights of this paper to countries in which corporations are mainly closely held corporations.
Okay, well, so I don't think that the yes, I don't think that the ownership of the equity is any different. As I mentioned in our model, we're not so concerned about whether the ownership is diverse or closed. So we just assumed that the ownership and the management are one. So basically, if you want to take it literally, we're assuming a proprietorship. There's just one. There's no difference. There's no incentive problem, for example, between the owners and the manager. So we can think that the owner is the manager. If it's a closely held corporation, they would have the same incentives to gamble. For example, FedEx, at the time that Fred Smith went to the casino to gamble up enough money to try to raise enough money to pay the fuel bill, that was still a startup, and it was very closely held. So I don't think that makes a big difference for our analysis.
Thank you, Professor. Before I hand it over to Krishna, on behalf of Gujarat National Law University Center for Law and Economics, on behalf of all the emerging scholars of law and economics, we extend you a very warm invitation to visit us as and when it is in your, whenever it's convenient in your itinerary. We would be very honored to host you, Professor. I say this on behalf of all these scholars who are interested in the area of law and economics in India.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I apologize to people who are unable to ask questions for some technical reasons. But you can send me an email. I'm at Washington University in St. Louis, and my email is dybvig@wustl.edu. I'll write it here.
It was indeed a very great opportunity for all of us, and as students, we are very fortunate to have this session in the 6th GNLU International Conference on Economic Analysis of Law, Governance, and Public Policy. We also thank Dr. Yinu Yusuf for his association. And in the end, I would like to thank our Professor Dr. Manoj, Center Head of Center for Law and Economics, for moderating the session and in fact making this session possible for us. Thank you.
Our apologies is some of the problems with the mic, but I'll just maybe tell what Krishna, the student convener of our Center for Law and Economics, she's Krishna, Professor Dybvig and Dr. Ho and everybody here, she's Krishna. All she said was she's very happy with the session, and she concludes the session after extending your invitation to India, to our university, Professor Dybvig, as and when you would want to, and that invitation extends to Dr. Hu also. So Professor Dybvig, please make some plans and come to Gandhinagar.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your kind invitations, and I will keep it in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. So should we conclude, with your permission, should we conclude the session?
Yes, sounds good to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, professors, Stephanus, Professor Ram Singh, Professor Carlos, Professor Gabriel, all professors from other universities, paper presenters, research scholars, Dr. Thakkar, student conveners, members of the Center for Law and Economics, and student convener of the Center for Law and Economics. We conclude the session at this point. Good night and thank you, Professor. We hope to contact with you soon.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I see I missed some questions. If you like, email them to me.
We will do
There's
that.
my email address.
We'll do that, Professor. Thank you. You've been very generous with your time. We are overstepped the time by quite many minutes. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your kindness. Good.
Okay, thank you.
Good night and good morning.
Okay, have a
morning.
good day.
Thank you very much.
Good night, Professor, for us, and good day for you.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.